When you've been married for 15 years, you believe you know every corner of your husband's soul. But that afternoon in 1967, a simple yellowed piece of paper hidden in his Bible shattered everything I thought was true. Good morning, my dears. I'm Amaryllis Thornwood, 78 years old, and today I'll share with you a story I've kept in my heart for decades. A story of betrayal, pain, but also forgiveness and rebuilding. Before I continue, if you're watching this video, please leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. This old heart is so happy to know my stories reach so many different places. Now, let's go back to 1967. I was 20 when I met Gerald, a tall man with eyes as deep as the ocean, who worked at the textile factory at the entrance of Millbrook, our small town in rural Pennsylvania. He was different from other young men, more serious, quieter, with a sadness in his eyes that intrigued me. He's a widower, my friend Constance told me during a church dance. His wife died in childbirth with their first baby, a terrible tragedy. Perhaps it was that sadness that initially attracted me. I was the pharmacist's daughter, always too protected. Gerald's pain seemed so real, so deep, that it awakened in me a desire to heal, to bring light to those sad eyes. Our courtship was brief, just 6 months before the wedding. My parents wanted something bigger, but Gerald insisted on a simple ceremony. I already had my grand wedding, he said. Now I just want to start over, without fanfare. And I, a foolish girl in love, agreed. I wanted to be the woman who would bring joy back into his life. Our house was small but cozy. A yellow building on Maple Street, number 17, with a yard where I planted my rose bushes and a lemon tree that years later would become our children's favorite place to play. We were happy, or at least I believed we were. We had 2 wonderful children, Theodore, born a year after our wedding, and Angelica, who came 3 years later. Gerald was a good father, a good husband. He worked hard as an accountant at the factory, was respected in the community, and attended church every Sunday. But there was something I couldn't define. A space between us I never managed to fill completely, as if part of him was always absent, even when he was physically by my side. The business trips began when Theodore was about 7 years old. Every 2 or 3 months, Gerald needed to go to Philadelphia for factory business. They never lasted more than a day. He always returned the next day, but different, quieter, more distant, sometimes with red eyes as if he'd been crying. "It's exhaustion from the trip," he'd say when I asked. And I believed, or forced myself to believe. We were a good family. We had a good life. Why doubt? That August of 1967 was hotter than usual. The kind of heat that sticks to your skin, that makes everyone irritable. Angelica, at 12, was in that difficult phase between girl and young woman, full of secrets and sighs. Theodore, at 14, had started working part-time at my father's pharmacy, learning the trade. And Gerald had been more distant than ever. That Friday, I decided to clean the entire house, the kind of deep cleaning my mother taught me, moving all the furniture, beating the rugs, polishing the floor with wax. The radio played softly. I remember it was a popular song that had won the folk music festival the previous year. I hummed while scrubbing, trying to shake off that strange feeling that hadn't left me for days. When I got to the living room shelf, I began removing books to clean off the dust. Gerald had few books, some accounting manuals, an old atlas, an encyclopedia we bought on installments to help the children with school, and his Bible. Ah, that large Bible with the black cover, with his name engraved in gold on the spine. A gift from his father when he turned 18, one of the few possessions he brought when we married. The Bible was on top of the shelf. When I grabbed it, it slipped from my hands, perhaps because of sweat, perhaps because of destiny, and fell to the floor with a dull thud. Some pages came loose, scattering across the freshly waxed floor. "Ave Maria," I murmured, bending down to collect them. That's when I saw it, a folded piece of paper, yellowed with time, that had fallen from between the pages. Normally, I would have simply put the paper back without looking. Gerald was a reserved man, and I respected that. But something made me stop. Something made me unfold that paper and read the words written on it. I knew the handwriting so well, Gerald's strong, slightly slanted script. But the words made my heart stop for a moment. Forgive me, Lord. She cannot know. 7 words, just 7 words, but they contained a universe of possibilities, none of them good. She, who was she? Me? And what couldn't I know? The paper had no date, no further explanation. I sat right there on the living room floor, holding that paper, my heart beating so hard it felt like it would explode. The first ideas that crossed my mind were the obvious ones. A lover, an extramarital affair. Gerald had another woman, a child with another woman. Was that why he took those trips? The emotional distance? Or were there debts, problems at work? Did Gerald gamble, drink in secret? So many possibilities, all painful. With trembling hands, I placed the paper exactly where I'd found it, between the pages of Proverbs, and put the Bible back on the shelf. I finished my cleaning like a sleepwalker, moving through the house without really seeing what I was doing. That night, when Gerald returned from work, I looked at him as if for the first time, searching for signs, clues, anything that could tell me what that phrase meant. He noticed my gaze. "Did something happen, Amaryllis?" he asked during dinner as I watched him cut the roast chicken. "No, nothing," I lied, tasting bitterness in my mouth. We had never lied to each other, or at least I thought we hadn't. "I'm just tired from cleaning." He nodded, turning his attention to the children, asking about their day at school. I observed his hands, his eyes, his gestures. They were the same as always, and yet they now seemed to belong to a stranger. The following weeks were torment. I lost sleep, lost my appetite. I began rifling through Gerald's pockets when he slept, examining his shirts for strange perfume, checking if the money he brought home matched his salary. Nothing. No proof of betrayal, no sign of financial problems, just that paper in the Bible and the periodic trips to Philadelphia. Theodore was the first to notice my change. "Mom, are you sick?" he asked one afternoon when he found me sitting on the porch staring into space. I had lost several pounds. My clothes were beginning to hang loose. "You're so pale." "It's just fatigue, my son," I answered, trying to smile. "It will pass soon." But it didn't pass. Doubt became a constant presence in our home, an invisible ghost that only I could see. I began to notice patterns I had previously ignored. How Gerald always returned from his trips with less money than he should have. How he avoided talking about his past. How certain subjects made him tense, and especially how he always locked the bottom drawer of his desk, the only one in the entire house for which I had no key. It was Mrs. Jenkins, our neighbor, who awakened me from my stupor. She wasn't exactly a close friend. With her reputation for reading cards and throwing bones, she was more tolerated than accepted in our religious community. But that day, when she saw me hanging clothes on the line, with eyes swollen from so much crying, she came to me. "You have shadows around you, Amaryllis," she said without preamble. "Dark shadows that are sucking your life force." I tried to laugh, tried to dismiss her with some excuse about just being tired, but something in the way she looked at me, with genuine compassion, without judgment, broke something inside me. "I found a paper," I confessed, the words coming out before I could contain them. In Gerald's Bible it said, "Forgive me, Lord, she cannot know." And now I can't stop thinking about what that means. Mrs. Jenkins didn't seem surprised, just nodded slowly, as if confirming something she already knew. "Secrets are like poison, my child. They slowly kill those who keep them and those who live with them without knowing. You need to discover the truth. No matter how painful it is, only then can you heal." "How?" I asked desperately. "How do I discover something that's so well hidden?" "Follow him," she answered simply. "The next time he goes to Philadelphia, follow him and find out where he goes, what he does there. The truth always leaves traces. Just follow the path." The idea seemed absurd at the moment, Me, Amaryllis Thornwood, devoted wife, mother, following my husband like a spy in a mystery movie. It was madness. And yet, the suggestion planted a seed in my mind that I couldn't uproot. 2 weeks later, Gerald announced another trip. "I have to go to Philadelphia tomorrow," he said during dinner. "Factory business. I'll be back the same day in the evening." I felt my heart race, my mouth go dry. It was now or never. "All right," I replied, trying to sound casual. "I'll take the opportunity to take the children to visit my mother." That night, I didn't sleep. I lay beside Gerald, listening to his regular breathing, wondering who really was the man with whom I'd shared a bed for so many years. When day broke, I got up before him. I prepared his breakfast, as I always did. "Have a good trip," I said, kissing him at the door. "See you tonight." As soon as he left, I sprang into action. I called my sister Zelda, inventing an emergency. I asked her to watch the children for a day. I packed a small bag, put on my best dress, a navy blue one with small white flowers, and headed to the bus station. I knew Gerald always took the 7:30 bus to Philadelphia. I'd kept the used tickets I found in his shirt pockets when I did the laundry. I arrived at the station breathless, my heart in my throat. I saw his bus still parked, but Gerald wasn't in sight. I hid behind a newsstand and waited. Soon, I saw him arriving, buying his ticket, and stopping for coffee at the counter of the snack bar. I took that moment to go to another counter and buy a ticket for the next bus, which would leave just 20 minutes later. Those 20 minutes were eternal. I sat on a bench far away, praying that nothing would go wrong, that he wouldn't see me, that I would have the courage to go ahead with this crazy plan. When I finally boarded my bus, I sat in the back, where no one would pay attention to a middle-aged woman crying silently. The journey to Philadelphia never seemed so long. 2 hours that seemed to stretch for days. I arrived about half an hour after Gerald. I ran to the station exit, fearing I'd lost him, but I was lucky. Or perhaps it was destiny. He was still there, standing on the sidewalk, apparently waiting for a taxi. I hid behind a group of students and observed. When a taxi finally stopped, I memorized the license plate number. As soon as Gerald left, I took the next available taxi. "Please follow that yellow car, the one with license plate PA46873, I asked, showing all the savings I had brought. "It's important." The driver, a gray-haired gentleman, looked at me in the rearview mirror with suspicion. "Are you some kind of detective, ma'am?" At that moment, the tears I had been trying to contain overflowed. "No, I'm just a wife trying to understand why her husband has been lying for 15 years. The man nodded silently, started the car, and followed in the direction I indicated. "I've seen many stories like this," he said kindly. "I hope you find peace, regardless of what you discover today." Gerald's taxi took us out of the city center, through increasingly less busy streets, until it stopped in front of a large white building, secluded and surrounded by a high wall. The iron gate had a sign. St. Clare Sanitarium. A sanitarium? My heart raced. Was Gerald sick? Was it some secret, shameful disease that he hid from all of us? "Would you like me to wait, ma'am?" asked the taxi driver, seeing my shock. "Yes, please," I replied, handing him more money. "I don't know how long I'll take." I got out of the taxi with wobbly legs. What would I find in there? What secret was so terrible that my husband needed to hide it for so many years? That day would change my life forever. But I didn't know yet. I didn't know that crossing that gate, I would discover a truth that would shake the foundations of everything I believed was my life. And most importantly, I didn't know that discovery would be just the beginning of a much longer journey. A journey of pain, yes, but also of forgiveness, understanding, and eventually of a deeper and truer love than I ever imagined possible. So, where were we? Ah, yes. I was standing in front of St. Clare Sanitarium, with my heart beating like a drum in my chest, trying to gather courage to enter. The taxi driver waited patiently, a silent witness to my anguish. I took a deep breath, adjusted my navy blue dress, ran my hand through my hair, and entered. The black and white tiled floor shone, it was so clean, and the air had that characteristic hospital smell, a mixture of disinfectant, ether, and something else I couldn't identify. A cold sensation ran down my spine. At the reception, a nun with a serene face greeted me. Her impeccably pressed gray habit contrasted with the white walls. "May I help you, ma'am?" she asked in a soft voice that didn't seem to match that place. I hadn't thought about what I would say. I hadn't planned anything beyond following Gerald. Now, faced with that nun, my mind went blank. "I came to visit a patient," I finally stammered. "What's the name?" She consulted a large registry book. That's when I saw him. Gerald was coming out a side door, talking with a gray-haired doctor with round glasses. I quickly hid behind a column, my heart beating so hard I was afraid they could hear it. "She had a difficult week, Mr. Thornwood," the doctor was saying. "But the new treatment seems to be helping. She recognized the flowers you brought last month." Thornwood. Gerald never used his full surname, Thornwood Aldrich. So here, he would just be Mr. Thornwood. "Can I see her?" Gerald's voice sounded tired, worried. "Of course," replied the doctor. "She's in the same room, but don't expect much today. The medication makes her drowsy." They headed to a staircase. I waited a few moments and followed them, keeping my distance. We went up to the second floor. They in front, me a few steps behind, hiding whenever one of them threatened to look back. My heart was beating so hard I could barely breathe. The second-floor corridor was long, with doors on both sides. Some were open, others closed. From one of the rooms came the sound of someone playing piano, a sad melody, interrupted several times as if the pianist constantly forgot what they were doing. Gerald and the doctor stopped in front of the last door, number 27. The doctor opened it, and Gerald entered. I waited for the doctor to move away and cautiously approached. The door had a small window, clouded by time. I positioned myself so I could look inside without being seen, and then I saw her. A woman was sitting in a wicker chair near the room's window, looking out at the garden below. She was thin, almost skeletal, with long gray hair carefully braided. She wore a simple white nightgown. Her face had an ethereal, almost ghostly beauty, but her eyes were empty, looking without really seeing. Gerald knelt beside her, took her hand, and kissed it with such tenderness that I felt a stab in my heart. He took from the package he was carrying a bouquet of violets, my favorite flowers, I thought bitterly, and placed them in a vase already prepared on the small table beside her. "Hello, Eulalia," he said with a voice so full of love that I barely recognized it. "I brought your favorite flowers." Eulalia? Who was Eulalia? The woman didn't answer, didn't react, just kept looking out the window as if Gerald didn't exist. He didn't seem upset by this. He took a book he had also brought and began reading in a low voice. It was The Little Prince, I realized. His voice was soft, patient, like someone reading to a child. "We only truly know the things we've tamed," Gerald read. "Men no longer have time to know anything." As I watched that surreal scene, I felt someone touch my shoulder. Startled, I turned around. It was a young nurse in an impeccably white uniform, with curious eyes. "Are you related to Mrs. Eulalia?" she asked. I swallowed hard, my mouth suddenly dry. Yes, I'm her cousin." "How nice that you came," she said, smiling. "Mr. Gerald is the only one who visits her after so many years. 20 years is a long time to stay faithful to someone who doesn't even recognize him anymore." 20 years? But we had only been married for 15. "She was a teacher, you know," continued the nurse, not noticing my shock. "Before the collapse during pregnancy. A tragedy, losing the baby like that and then her sanity. But your cousin is a saint, comes every month since 1947, brings flowers, reads to her, pays for the best treatment." Each word was like a knife in my heart. 1947, the year I met Gerald. He told me he was a widower, that his wife had died in childbirth with their first child, that he was alone, lost in his grief until he found me. What? What happened to her? I managed to ask, my voice almost a whisper. Schizophrenia aggravated by birth trauma, explained the nurse. The baby was stillborn in the 8th month. She never recovered from the shock, tried to kill herself twice before being admitted here. Mr. Gerald tried to care for her at home for almost a year, but it was impossible. She didn't recognize him anymore, had terrible hallucinations. Each detail was a new blow. The story Gerald told me about his past, his dead wife in childbirth, his loneliness, his mourning, all lies. His first wife wasn't dead. She was there, alive, institutionalized in that sanitarium for 20 years. Will she ever get better? I asked, the words coming out with difficulty. The nurse sadly shook her head. Unfortunately, there are better and worse days, but she never fully regained consciousness. She lives in her own world. The doctors say it's irreversible. I couldn't stay there a second longer. I mumbled an excuse and ran down the corridor, down the stairs, across the lobby in a blur of tears. The air seemed to have been sucked from my lungs. 20 years of lies. My marriage, my children, my life, all built on an illusion. The taxi driver saw me coming and opened the car door. He didn't ask anything when I entered sobbing, just offered me a handkerchief and asked, "Where to, ma'am?" "To the bus station," I managed to say between sobs. "I need to go back home." During the entire journey back, I cried like I had never cried in my life. The kind lady next to me on the bus held my hand the whole way, asking no questions, just offering the silent comfort of her presence. When I got off at the Millbrook station, I could barely see the path in front of me. I picked up the children at Zelda's house. My sister immediately realized something was wrong, but respected my silence when I shook my head, indicating I didn't want to talk about it. I took the children home, prepared dinner like an automaton. I answered their questions and conversations with monosyllables and forced smiles. After they went to bed, I sat in the dark living room with Gerald's Bible in my lap. I opened it again to the book of Proverbs and removed that yellowed piece of paper. "Forgive me, Lord, she cannot know." Now I understood the meaning of those words. The request for forgiveness wasn't for a trivial betrayal or a small lie. It was for an entire lifetime of deception. I took the paper to the kitchen and burned it in the wood stove, watching the flames consume those words that had consumed my peace. The ashes flew up the chimney, but the pain remained burning in my chest. When Gerald arrived, it was already past 9 at night. He opened the door, finding the house silent, only the weak light from the living room lamp illuminating my figure sitting in the armchair. His eyes immediately registered something was wrong, my face swollen from so much crying, the small suitcase beside the armchair, the closed Bible on the table. "Amaryllis, what happened?" he asked, dropping his own bag on the floor. My voice came out stronger than I expected, despite the tears that started flowing again. "Who is Eulalia?" The effect was immediate. All the blood seemed to drain from his face. He leaned against the wall as if his legs could no longer support him. His eyes, always so confident, were now wide with panic. "How?" was all he managed to say. "I followed you today," I confessed, "to the St. Clair Sanitarium. I saw everything. I know everything. I want to know why you lied to me for 15 years. Gerald closed his eyes for a moment, as if absorbing the impact of my words. When he opened them again, they looked different, older, more tired, as if an enormous weight had been placed on his shoulders. And then, right there in our living room, he fell to his knees and began to cry. These weren't discreet, contained tears like I'd heard him shed a few times. This was a convulsive, uncontrolled cry, as if a dam had broken after years of holding back the waters. Between sobs, he began to talk, the words coming in a torrent, as if he feared that if he stopped, he would never be able to finish his confession. "I met Eulalia in 1945, right after the war. She was an elementary school teacher in Philadelphia. I had just gotten my first job as a junior accountant. We fell passionately in love. We married in 6 months. Each word was a new stab in my heart, but I didn't interrupt him. I needed to hear everything, every detail of the lie that had been my life. She got pregnant the following year. We were so happy, planning the future, choosing names. In the 8th month, she started having problems. She said she heard voices, had strange visions. The doctor said it was just pregnancy nerves that would pass after the birth. Gerald stopped, breathing with difficulty, as if reliving those memories caused him physical pain. But it didn't pass. The baby was still born, a boy. Eulalia collapsed completely. She spent days screaming, thrashing. When she finally calmed down, she wasn't the same person anymore. She didn't recognize me, didn't speak coherently, had terrible hallucinations. The doctors diagnosed schizophrenia aggravated by trauma. I remembered the fragile figure in the wicker chair, looking out the window without really seeing. It was hard to imagine that woman had once been a vibrant teacher, full of dreams. I tried to care for her at home for almost a year. I abandoned my job, spent all our savings on doctors and medicines, but it was impossible. She didn't sleep, had violent episodes, tried to kill herself twice. The doctors recommended institutionalization as the only option. Gerald raised his eyes to me, begging for understanding. When I admitted her to St. Claire, I promised myself I would never abandon her, that I would always visit, pay for the best treatment, keep alive the hope that one day she would improve. "And then you met me," I said, my voice trembling with anger and pain. "Yes," he confessed. "A year after Eulalia's admission, I was destroyed, Amaryllis. Alone, hopeless, drowning in debt and guilt. When I met you at that factory party, it was as if a ray of light entered the darkness." He got up with difficulty, took 2 steps in my direction, but stopped when I raised my hand in warning. "I knew no one would agree to marry a man like me, poor, in debt, with a wife institutionalized forever in a sanitarium. So I lied. I said I was a widower. For 15 years, I accused, each word dripping venom. 15 years, Gerald. We had children. We built a life, all based on a lie." "I know," he cried. Each day, the weight of that lie grew. Each month, when I went to visit her, I asked God's forgiveness for what I was doing to you both. "Forgive me, Lord, she cannot know." I wrote that in a moment of despair years ago, when I almost told you everything. I kept it in the Bible to remind me of my sin, of my weakness. So many things made sense now. The monthly trips, the money that was always missing to pay for the sanitarium, the red eyes when he returned from crying over her, the way he avoided talking about the past. "What happens now?" he asked, his voice small, defeated. I looked at this man I had loved for 15 years, the father of my children, the center of my world, now revealed as a stranger. All the anger, all the pain I felt at that moment crystallized into a single certainty. I couldn't stay there, not that night, perhaps never again. "Now," I said, rising and picking up my small suitcase, "I'm going to my parents' house. The children come with me. As for the rest, I don't know, Gerald. Honestly, I don't know." He didn't try to stop me. Perhaps he knew he had no right to. Not anymore. I woke Theodore and Angelica, vaguely explaining we needed to spend a few days at their grandparents' house. They were confused, sleepy, but obeyed without many questions. When we went out the door, Gerald remained in the same place, looking smaller and older than ever. "I love you, Amaryllis," he said almost in a whisper. "I've always loved you. That was never a lie." I didn't answer. I had no words, no strength. I just closed the door and walked down the quiet street with my children, leaving behind the yellow house on Maple Street, number 17, and the 15 years of life I thought I knew. The scandal was inevitable in Millbrook, a small town where everyone knew each other, where whispers ran faster than the wind. Amaryllis Thornwood left her husband, some said. Gerald has another family, others speculated. No one knew the whole truth, and I didn't have the strength to explain. My parents took me in without questions, just with the concerned look of those who see their daughter return home with 2 children and a broken heart. Theodore and Angelica wanted answers that I didn't know how to give. How to explain to two children that the father they adored had built our family on a lie, that the reliable, respectable man was capable of such deception. But this story doesn't end here, my dears. No. Fate still had many surprises in store for me, and the biggest of them was yet to come. What would happen in the following months would forever change my understanding of love, forgiveness, and the complexity of the human heart. The first days at my parents' house were the most difficult. That feeling of regression, of going back to being a girl under the paternal roof, but now with two confused children and a broken heart. My mother, Cecilia, didn't ask questions, just put an extra plate of food in front of me saying, "You need to eat, daughter. Pain doesn't go away with hunger." My father, Anthony, dealt with the situation differently. Did that scoundrel do something to you, Amaryllis? Because if he did, I'll end him. I had to calm him down, tell him that no, it wasn't anything like that. How to explain the real reason? How to tell that the respectable son-in-law who frequented the pharmacy, who played checkers with him on Sundays, had another wife institutionalized in a sanitarium? Theodore, at 14, was the first to demand answers. 3 days after we arrived, he entered the room I shared with Angelica, closed the door, and crossed his arms with a determination that painfully reminded me of Gerald. "Mom, what really happened? Why did we leave home that way? Why doesn't Dad come to see us?" I sat on the edge of the bed, inviting him to sit beside me. How to explain that to a teenager? I decided to tell a simplified version of the truth. "Your father hid something very important from me, Theodore. Something that changes everything about our family." "Does he have another woman?" he asked, his cheeks flushed with shame at even formulating the question. "It's complicated," I replied. "He was married before me. His wife didn't die as he told us. She is alive, institutionalized in a hospital in Philadelphia for many years." Theodore's eyes widened. "What do you mean, Mom? Dad has 2 wives? That's a crime." "Smart child, my Theodore, always was. Legally, perhaps. Morally, certainly. That's why we're here now. I need time to understand what to do, how to move forward." Can we see him?" His voice oscillated between anger and longing. As shocked as he was, this was still his father we were talking about, the man who taught him to fish in the river, who carried him on his shoulders when he was small. "Not now, son. I need time. You and Angelica need it too, all in due time." Angelica handled the situation differently. At 12, still so much a child in many ways, she closed up like a flower at nightfall. She stopped talking, barely ate. She spent hours sitting on my parents' porch, looking at the street, as if expecting to see her father turning the corner at any moment. Meanwhile, Gerald didn't stand idle. The letters began to arrive. A week after our departure, the first one, delivered by a colleague from the factory, contained just a few lines. "Amaryllis, forgive me. I know I don't deserve it, but please let me explain everything in person." I didn't respond. I burned the letter in the stove, just as I had burned that paper from the Bible. But the letters continued to arrive, 1 per week, each longer than the previous one. Gerald told everything. How he met Eulalia, how their marriage was, how he faced her collapse, the sleepless nights trying to care for a wife who no longer recognized him, the painful decision to institutionalize her, the promise never to abandon her. And then how he met me, the desperation of loneliness, the burden of guilt, the light he found in me, the lie he initially told to win me over, then to not lose me, and finally to protect our children and the life we built. I read each letter, absorbed each word, and then burned them, as if the fire could purify those painful revelations. I didn't respond to any. What could I say? That I forgave him? I didn't know if I was capable. That I hated him? That wasn't true either. What I felt was something more complicated, a confused mixture of love, betrayal, pity, and anger that I myself couldn't untangle. The town, of course, was bubbling with gossip. In Millbrook, A town so small you could walk from one end to the other in an hour. Secrets were like coins. They passed quickly, from hand to hand, until they lost their original shine. "They say he beat her," whispered Mrs. Matthews, the seamstress, to my mother at the market. "I heard he has another family in Philadelphia," speculated the traveling salesman who stopped at my father's pharmacy. "The pharmacist's daughter left her husband. It's outrageous," criticized the pastor, who seemed to forget that "thou shalt not judge" was a Christian precept. I ignored it all, focused on rebuilding some kind of normalcy for my children. Theodore began working more hours at his grandfather's pharmacy, finding in work an escape from the confusion of feelings. Angelica slowly came out of her shell of silence, encouraged by piano lessons that my mother insisted she take with Miss Elmira from the church. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months. Before I knew it, we were in January 1968, almost 6 months since that fateful trip to Philadelphia. The scorching summer seemed to reflect the climate within me, a heat of uncertainties, doubts that didn't cool with the passage of time. Gerald never tried to visit us, respecting my silence as a form of response. His letters continued to arrive, now bi-weekly, but the tone had changed. No more explanations or apologies, just accounts of his daily life, news about the house he still considered ours, small messages for the children that he knew I might or might not share. "The white rose bush you planted bloomed beautifully this year, Amaryllis. I thought of you with each bud that opened." The neighbor's dog had puppies. I remembered how Theodore always wanted a dog. Maybe someday? I found Angelica's poetry notebook while cleaning her room. I didn't read it, respecting her privacy, but kept it with care. Small fragments of life that continued in the yellow house on Maple Street, number 17, now inhabited only by a lonely man and his unraveled lies. It was in February 1968, on a muggy Thursday morning, that I received a different telegram. It wasn't from Gerald, but from St. Clair Hospital. "Mrs. Amaryllis Thornwood, we inform you of the death of Eulalia Thornwood. Funeral, tomorrow, 10 a.m. Dr. Menezes, Medical Director." I read and reread those telegraphic words, trying to process what they meant. Eulalia had died. Gerald's first wife, the woman he religiously visited for 20 years, the woman whose existence he hid from me, had departed. I didn't go to the funeral. How could I? That woman who, without knowing it, had been my rival for so many years, deserved to rest in peace, without my intrusive presence. But I found myself thinking about her all day, about how she might have been before the illness, the dreams she had, the life she could have lived if fate hadn't been so cruel. 2 weeks later, my sister Zelda knocked on the door, breathless. She lived on the other side of town, near the church, and rarely visited us during the week. "Gerald is in the hospital," she said without preamble. "Severe pneumonia. The doctors don't know if he'll make it." I felt my heart stop, as if someone had pressed a switch inside my chest. "How did you find out about this?" "Marvin from the factory," she replied. "He didn't show up for work for 3 days. When they went to his house, they found him collapsed in the living room with a very high fever. They took him to the hospital right away." I looked at my parents, at my children, all staring at me, waiting for my reaction. What should I do? This man had lied to me for 15 years. He had built our marriage on sand. He had another wife when we married, but he was also the man I had loved all my life, the father of my children, the man who faithfully cared for a woman who didn't even recognize him anymore for 20 long years. What kind of person does that? What kind of love is that? "I'm going to the hospital," I decided. "Alone," I added when I saw Theodore getting up to accompany me. "We'll talk later, son." The Millbrook Hospital was a modest building with only 2 wards. Gerald was in the men's ward, separated from the other patients by an improvised screen. When I entered, Nurse Margaret, whom I had known since childhood, widened her eyes in surprise. "Mrs. Thornwood, how good of you to come. He's not doing well at all." I approached the bed, and what I saw broke my heart. Gerald was almost unrecognizable, thin, pale, with oxygen tubes in his nose. His hair was completely gray, disheveled, his beard unshaven. But his eyes, oh, his eyes were still the same. When he saw me, tears ran down his hollowed cheeks. "You came?" he whispered, his voice hoarse from coughing. "I came," I replied, sitting on the edge of the bed and taking his hand. It was too warm, feverish. "I don't deserve it," he said, trying to adjust himself but giving up from the effort. "Probably not," I agreed. "But I'm here anyway." We sat in silence for a few minutes, with only the sound of his difficult breathing filling the space between us. Finally, he spoke again. "She died," he said, as if I didn't know. "After all these years, she finally found peace." "I knew," I responded. "I'm sorry." He weakly squeezed my hand. "I wasn't a good man, Amaryllis. I lied to you. I betrayed your trust, but I never stopped loving you. You and the children are the best thing that ever happened to me." "Why didn't you tell me the truth from the beginning?" I asked, the question that had tormented me for 6 months. "Why didn't you trust me?" Gerald closed his eyes for a moment, as if gathering strength. "Fear," he said finally. "That's simple. Fear of losing you, of being alone again. When I met you, I was so broken, so hopeless. Eulalia had been institutionalized for a year with no prospect of improvement. I lived between work and the sanitarium, drowning in debt, in guilt." He stopped, overcome by a bout of coughing. I offered him water, which he drank with difficulty. "At that factory dance," he continued, "when I saw you for the first time, smiling, so young, so full of life, it was as if a ray of light entered the darkness. I thought, who would be interested in a man like me, tied to a wife who doesn't even recognize me anymore, without money, without a future?" "So you invented that you were a widower," I completed. "Yes," he confessed, a lie that seemed so small at that moment. A wife who was dead to the world, dead to me in every sense except the most cruel, the physical. I thought it would be easier for everyone, cleaner. "And after we married, after we had children, why didn't you tell me?" His hand trembled in mine. Each day it became more difficult. How to tell a truth like that when we were already building a life together? How to risk losing you, losing the children? And how could I ask you to live with that shadow over our marriage? The sick wife that I still visited, that I still had the moral obligation to care for? A nurse appeared to check his temperature, momentarily breaking our conversation. When she left, Gerald continued, his voice weaker. "For 15 years, I lived divided between two worlds. The real world with you and the children, full of love and joy, and the world of shadows, with Eulalia in the sanitarium. A constant reminder of my failure, of my lie. Each month I went to visit her, knowing I was betraying you, betraying her. I asked God's forgiveness every night, but I continued in that farce because the alternative, losing you, seemed worse than hell." The tears were flowing freely down his face now, and I realized I was crying too. 15 years of marriage, and we had never talked so deeply as in that moment, in the shadow of illness and death. "We should have had this conversation years ago," I said, wiping away a tear. "Yes," he agreed, "but fear is a cruel master, Amaryllis. It teaches you to protect your lies as if they were treasures, when in fact they are chains that bind you." During the 2 weeks Gerald was in the hospital, I spent hours by his side. We talked more than in all the years of marriage. He told me about Eulalia, how intelligent and kind she was before the illness, how he suffered seeing her lose her mind, how he felt divided between his duty to her and his love for me and our children. "I don't want you to think I didn't love her," he said one day, when he was already recovering, sitting up in bed with more color in his face. "I loved Eulalia deeply, but love changes, Amaryllis. The love for her transformed into duty, into responsibility. At a certain point, I was just the guardian of her memories, the only one who remembered who she really was before the disease consumed her." "And me?" I asked, insecure like a teenager. "What do you feel for me?" Gerald took both my hands in his, looking me in the eyes with an intensity I hadn't seen in years. You, Amaryllis, you were my salvation, my new beginning. I've loved you from the first moment, and I love you even more now, after everything. You gave me wonderful children, a true home, a purpose beyond pain. The only thing I did right in life was to love you, even if imperfectly, even with this shadow between us. When Gerald was discharged, I asked what he wanted most now. I want my family back, he replied without hesitation. I want a chance to do things right this time, without lies, without secrets, just us, with all the truth between us, however painful it may be. I didn't answer immediately. I needed to think, to consult my children, and to understand my own heart. I returned to my parents' house, leaving Gerald in our house. Or was it his house now? Alone with his hopes and regrets. For 3 long months, I pondered what to do. I talked with God on sleepless nights, seeking direction. I spoke with my children, who surprisingly showed more compassion than I did. Dad made a mistake, Mom, said Theodore. But who doesn't make mistakes? He cared for that woman for 20 years, even when she was sick. That shows character, don't you think? I miss him, admitted Angelica, finally breaking her long silence on the subject. I miss our home. May 1968. The rainy season had ended, leaving Millbrook with that feeling of renewal. The trees were greener, the air cleaner, as if nature was giving us a new chance. It was time for decisions. During those 3 months after Gerald's discharge from the hospital, I experienced a whirlwind of emotions. Anger and hurt still ran through my veins, but now mixed with understanding and, surprisingly, admiration. What kind of man remains faithful to a wife who doesn't even recognize him anymore for 20 long years? What kind of man sacrifices so much for a commitment that no one would hold him to? The same man who would be capable of lying to me for 15 years, my conscience answered. And yet I loved him. Beneath the betrayal, beneath the lie, there was a real, palpable love that sustained us all that time. On a particularly beautiful afternoon, I called Theodore and Angelica for a conversation in my parents' backyard under the old mango tree that shaded the back of the house. I had already spoken with them separately, but we needed a family conversation. You know that your father and I have been talking, I began, observing their anxious faces. I had been honest with them about him having kept secret the existence of his first wife, about the lie that built our family. Theodore, always the most practical, went straight to the point. You're going back to him, aren't you? I looked at my son, now almost a man at 15, how he had matured in these difficult last months. I'm thinking about it, I admitted, but it's not a decision that affects just me. It affects you too. This family is ours, all 4 of us. I want to know how you feel. Angelica, who had spent so much time in silence, surprised me with her sudden eloquence. Dad made a big mistake, Mom, but he also suffered a lot, and now he's alone after losing 2 families. The wisdom of that 13-year-old girl left me speechless for a moment. When we become parents, we forget that our children are not just witnesses to our lives, but perceptive judges of our actions. I want to go back home, she continued. I miss my room, the lemon tree, Mrs. Jenkins and her bones. I miss being a family, even an imperfect one. Theodore agreed. Grandpa and Grandma are wonderful, but it's not the same thing. And Dad, he needs us now, don't you think? That afternoon sealed my decision, but I knew we couldn't simply return as if nothing had happened. We needed a new beginning, with new rules, new understandings. The next day, I took the familiar path to Maple Street. It was the first time I had returned to our house since that fateful night in August. My heart was beating so hard I thought the neighbors could hear it. The house was different. The garden, once so well tended, showed signs of neglect. The rose bushes needed pruning, the grass was too high. The yellow paint on the facade was peeling in some places. It seemed like a metaphor for our marriage, still solid in its structure, but urgently needing care. I knocked on the door, feeling strangely like a visitor. It took a few moments until I heard footsteps, and then there he was, Gerald, my husband, the man I had loved all my life, the man who had betrayed me in the most profound way possible. He looked better than in the hospital, but still far from the strong, confident man I knew. He had lost weight, his hair was grayer, and his eyes carried a new pain, deeper. "Amaryllis," he said, as if my name was a prayer. "Come in, please." The living room was clean, but with that superficial cleanliness of someone who doesn't really care. Books piled in the corner, a half-empty coffee cup on the table, curtains closed, blocking the afternoon light. "Sit down," he offered, indicating the sofa. The same sofa where we had so often sat together to listen to the radio, to help the children with homework, to simply be together at the end of a long day. I sat on the edge, maintaining some distance. He remained standing, restless, as if he didn't know what his place was in this house we once shared so comfortably. "I've thought a lot," I began, going straight to the point, "about us, about what happened, about what to do now." He nodded without interrupting, his eyes fixed on me as if he feared I might disappear at any moment. "I can't pretend I'm not hurt," I continued. "I can't pretend that what you did hasn't changed everything between us. A lie of this magnitude isn't something you get over overnight." "I know," he said in a low voice. "I don't expect you to forgive me easily, Amaryllis. I don't have that right, but I also can't deny what we've built together. 15 years, I went on. 2 children. A life that, despite being founded on a lie, had moments of genuine happiness, of genuine love. I took a deep breath, gathering courage for the words that would change our lives again. "I'm willing to try again, Gerald, to rebuild what was broken, but with conditions." His face lit up with a hope so pure, so vulnerable, that I felt my heart tighten. How could I still love this man after everything? And yet, I did. "Anything," he promised. "I'll do anything, Amaryllis." "First, complete honesty from now on," I demanded. "No secrets, no matter how small, no lies, not even those you think will protect me." He nodded emphatically. "I promise." "Second, I want you to transfer the house to my name," I continued, surprising him. "Not as punishment, but as a guarantee. If I ever discover another secret of this magnitude, I need to know that my children and I won't be left destitute." He hesitated for only a second before agreeing. "That's fair. I'll speak with the notary tomorrow." "Third," and here my voice trembled a little, "I want us to seek help. A doctor, a psychologist, someone who can help us rebuild this broken trust. I know it's not common in our town that people will talk, but I don't see how we can do this alone." This was perhaps the most difficult condition. In 1968, in a small town like Millbrook, seeking psychological help was almost a scandal, a sign of weakness or madness. But I knew we needed it, a neutral third person who could guide us through this minefield we had created. To my surprise, Gerald didn't hesitate this time. "I completely agree. In fact, I've already researched this. There's a psychologist in Philadelphia, Dr. Hermes, who sees couples. We could go once a week." His readiness surprised me, showing that he had truly reflected on our situation, that he was genuinely willing to do what was necessary to fix us. "And lastly," I said, getting up and walking to the window, opening the curtains to let in the late afternoon light, "I want you to take me to Eulalia's grave." He turned pale, clearly not expecting this request. "Amaryllis, are you sure? Why?" I turned to face him, feeling a new strength within me. "Because she was part of your life for much longer than I was. Because, like it or not, she is part of our story. And because I need to make peace with her memory, if we really want to move forward." Gerald was silent for a long moment, and I could see tears shining in his eyes. Finally, he nodded. "Whenever you want to go, I'll be ready." That night, I returned to my parents' house, to Gerald's surprise, who clearly expected me to stay. "I need to do this gradually," I explained. "First us, then the children, one step at a time." He accepted, albeit with evident disappointment. Whatever time you need, Amaryllis. I'll wait as long as necessary. The following week, we began our sessions with Dr. Hermes in Philadelphia, a balding man with thick glasses, with a kindness in his gaze that immediately inspired confidence. In his modest but welcoming office, we began the painful process of unearthing every hurt, every lie, every buried hope. "You built a castle on quicksand, Mr. Gerald," said Dr. Hermes in our first session. "No matter how beautiful the castle, it was doomed from the start. Now we need to find solid ground to rebuild." For almost 2 months, we went to Philadelphia every Thursday. 2 hours by bus, an hour of session that seemed to drain all our energy, and 2 more hours back, usually in silence, each absorbing the day's revelations and reflections. It was on one of those Thursdays, after a particularly intense session where Gerald had confessed his constant fear of being discovered, that I asked to go to the cemetery. The Philadelphia Municipal Cemetery was large and tree-lined, an almost peaceful place, if not for its somber function. Eulalia's grave was simple, a marble headstone with her name, dates of birth and death, and the inscription, "Beloved wife and teacher, rest in the peace life denied you." I stood there, before that cold stone that represented a woman I never knew, but who, in a way, shared my husband with me for 15 years. I felt a strange mixture of emotions, pity for her tragic fate, anger for her invisible presence in my marriage, and a kind of gratitude, for without her illness, I would never have met Gerald. "She liked violets," said Gerald beside me, breaking the long silence. "Before she got sick, she filled our small house with violets. She said they were like children, delicate, but surprisingly resilient." "You said my favorite flowers were violets," I commented, remembering the bouquets he gave me on anniversaries. "Was that because of her?" He lowered his eyes, ashamed. "Yes, at first it was a coincidence. You mentioned that you liked them. Then I think it became a way of keeping the 2 parts of my life connected, even if in a distorted way." Strangely, that confession didn't hurt me. On the contrary, it humanized Eulalia for me. She was no longer just the other wife, the unwitting rival, but a real woman, with tastes and dreams, whose life was brutally interrupted by illness. "She would have liked you," said Gerald, breaking the silence again. Eulalia always said that honesty was the greatest virtue. The disease took that from her, the ability to distinguish the real from the imaginary. I betrayed that principle when I lied to you. Something healed inside me at that moment. Not completely. Some wounds never fully heal, but enough to move forward. The following week, Theodore and Angelica returned to the house on Maple Street. I remained at my parents' house for another month, visiting daily, having dinner with them, slowly rebuilding our relationship. In July, I finally returned home, not to our old bedroom, I wasn't ready for that yet, but to the guest room at the end of the hall. Gerald accepted this condition without complaints, understanding that intimacy would need to be regained, not presumed. Autumn gave way to winter, winter to spring. Slowly, our family life found a new rhythm, different from before, more cautious perhaps, but also more honest. Gerald and I still saw Dr. Hermes, now bi-weekly. The children flourished, relieved that we were together again, even if imperfectly. On the first anniversary of Eulalia's death, in February 1969, Gerald asked if I would accompany him to the cemetery again. "Do you want me to go?" I asked, genuinely surprised. "If you want to," he replied. "She's part of our story now, as you said, and I'd like you to know that I no longer see her as a shameful secret, but as part of what made me the man I am today." We went together. I took a small vase of violets to place on the grave. As Gerald murmured a prayer, I looked at that headstone and silently thanked Eulalia for having loved Gerald first, for having been strong in her tragedy, and for inadvertently teaching me that love is more complex and resilient than I ever imagined. On the way back, for the first time in more than a year, Gerald held my hand on the bus, and I let him. That night, I returned to our marital bedroom. There were no grand gestures or dramatic declarations, just the silent acceptance that we were ready to try again, to really share a life with all its complexity and imperfections. In the years that followed, we raised our children with honesty. When they were old enough to fully understand, we told them the whole story: Eulalia, Gerald's lie, our separation and reconciliation. It was difficult, but necessary. "Why did you go back to him, Mom?" asked Angelica years later, when she was already a young woman of 18, about to go to college in New York. "After such a big lie, how did you manage to forgive?" I reflected on that question, looking for the most honest answer. It wasn't an easy or quick forgiveness, daughter. It was a process that continues to this day in some aspects, but I realized that people are complex, that we all make mistakes, some bigger than others, and that sometimes true love isn't the one from fairy tales, perfect and flawless, but the one that survives even the worst storms, that heals even the deepest wounds. Gerald never kept secrets from me again. Sometimes I would find him looking at old photographs, him and Eulalia, young, smiling before the tragedy. I would sit beside him, and he would tell me stories from that time without guilt or shame. It was part of who he was, of our shared history. We lived together for 30 more years after that Bible discovery. They weren't perfect years, no marriage is, but they were honest years. We had grandchildren, saw Theodore take over his grandfather's pharmacy and transform it into a respected chain. We saw Angelica become a teacher. "Like Eulalia," Gerald commented with pride and a touch of melancholy. When Gerald died in 1998, at the age of 76, I was by his side, holding his hand. His last words were, "Thank you for coming back, Amaryllis. You taught me what true forgiveness is." And now, my dears, looking back at 78 years old to that young Amaryllis, devastated by the discovery of a lie, I think of all I learned about love, forgiveness, and the incredible human capacity to begin again. Life is made of difficult choices. There is no path without stones. There is no love without pain. What matters is how we respond to difficulties, how we rise after falls, how we find the courage to try again, even when everything seems lost. If there's one lesson I'd like to leave with you, my dear viewers, it's this: forgiveness is not weakness, but the greatest strength we can have. And love, true love, survives even the most painful truths. Thank you for following my story to the end. I hope it touched your hearts, made you reflect on the power of forgiveness, on the nature of true love. Don't forget to leave your like, subscribe to the Grandma's Diary channel, and share your own stories of forgiveness in the comments. Until our next meeting, God willing. And always remember, it's not our mistakes that define us, but how we choose to learn from them and move forward. May God bless each one of you.